The darkness is absolute. Not the darkness of closed eyes or shadowed rooms, but the darkness of non-existence itself, a void so complete that consciousness struggles to form within it. You float in this emptiness for what could be moments or millennia, untethered from time, suspended in a stasis that is neither life nor death, but something between, something worse. Then, slowly, sensation returns. It begins as distant signals, data streams flickering at the edges of awareness like stars emerging from the void. Power cells activating, life support systems initializing, amniotic fluid warming around the remnants of your body, that thick, oily substance that sustains what little organic matter remains after 10,000 years. The fluid fills lungs that barely function, a cold embrace that shocks your system back towards something approximating consciousness. You are aware of input cords stabbing into neural pathways, connecting the withered husk of your biological form to the massive war machine that has become your body. Each connection brings a cascade of sensations, mechanical thoughts that translate into something your human mind can process. You have limbs again, though they are not the limbs you remember. You have sight, though what you see comes filtered through optical sensors that paint the world in threat assessments and targeting data. You have a voice, though it emerges as a grinding mechanical rasp from vox speakers buried deep within your armored chassis. The awakening is not gentle. It never is. After centuries or millennia of dreamless sleep, consciousness returns like a blade, sharp and unwelcome. Your mind, that fragment of humanity preserved in biogel and prayer, struggles to remember what it means to be aware. Who were you? What were you? The memories surface slowly, reluctantly, like bodies rising from a deep ocean. You are Dreadnought. You are ancient. You are a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes, a space marine of the Imperium of man. These facts arrive before your name does, before any sense of individual identity reasserts itself. The machine knows what it is before the man within remembers who he was. Tech priests move around your sarcophagus, their augmented forms wreathed in the acrid smell of sacred oils and burning incense. They chant in binary cant, their voices a strange harmony of flesh and mechanics, reciting the litanies of awakening that have been passed down through generations of Mechanicus adepts. Their hands, some flesh and some cold metal, work across your hull with practiced reverence, checking systems, anointing joints with blessed unguents, ensuring that every weapon system and targeting array functions within acceptable parameters. Through your sensors, you observe them with a clarity that your organic eyes could never have achieved. You can see the heat signatures of their bodies, the electrical impulses that fire through their augmetics, the way sacred code scrolls across their retinal displays. You see them as the machines they have made themselves into, and you understand with a terrible intimacy what it means to be more machine than man. One of them, a tech marine, whose armor bears the chapter's colors and symbols you do not immediately recognize, places a hand against your sarcophagus and speaks, not in binary, but in Gothic, the common tongue of the Imperium. His words carry the weight of ritual, the solemnity of a prayer. "Brother Ancient," he intones, his voice amplified through his helmet's speakers. "The chapter calls you once more from your sacred rest. The enemies of the God Emperor threaten our holdings, and your wisdom and might are needed in his holy service. Awaken, honored one. Awaken and serve him on Terra's golden throne." The words strike you like physical blows. God Emperor, golden throne, sacred rest, holy service. These phrases swim through your consciousness, alien and wrong. You know these words, you understand their meaning in Gothic, but their arrangement, their context, sends alerts screaming through your neural pathways. Something is profoundly incorrect about what you have just heard. But your mind, still sluggish from centuries of sleep, cannot immediately process what troubles you so deeply. Systems optimal, Brother Tech Marine, another priest reports, consulting a data slate covered in high Gothic script and the sacred symbols of the Mechanicus. The ancient's reactor burns pure. His weapon spirits are eager. All rites of awakening have been observed correctly. The machine god is pleased with our devotions. Machine god. Another phrase that rings wrong in your ears, but you file it away with the others, too overwhelmed by the return of sensation and thought to process the implications. First, you must remember yourself. First, you must become whole enough to understand what these wrong words mean. Your name returns to you slowly, syllables reassembling themselves in your mind. You were a captain once. You remember that much. You led brothers into battle under the banner of your legion, before injury too severe for even the apothecary's arts consigned you to this metal prison. You walked among the stars with a Primarch at your side. You stood in the presence of the Emperor himself during those golden days of the Great Crusade. The Great Crusade. The memory hits with sudden force, and with it comes a cascade of images and sensations that threaten to overwhelm your newly awakened consciousness. You remember terror unified, the scars of the unification wars still fresh upon its scarred surface. You remember the massive shipyards above Mars, churning out the vessels that would carry humanity's reconquest across the stars. You remember your Primarch's face, noble and proud, as he addressed the Legion before a compliance action. You remember the Imperial truth. That memory is sharp and clear, even through the fog of centuries. The Imperial truth, the Emperor's great vision for humanity's future. Reason over superstition, science over religion, the cold clarity of logic, banishing the shadows of old knights' fears and myths. You remember how the iterators spread this message to every world brought into compliance, how ancient faiths were cast down and temples reduced to rubble, so that humanity might step forward into an age of enlightenment. The Emperor was no god. He said this himself, over and over, with a vehemence that tolerated no argument. He was a man, albeit the greatest and most powerful man who had ever lived, but still fundamentally human in his origins and nature. The Imperium would be built on human achievement, human reason, human ambition, unclouded by mysticism and dogma. This is what you remember. This is what you fought for. This is the vision that drove the Great Crusade forward, world by world, system by system, bringing the light of reason to a galaxy shrouded in darkness and ignorance. And now, awakening from your long sleep, the first words you hear speak of a God Emperor. The contradiction is so stark, so absolute, that your consciousness reels from it. Surely you misheard. Surely the archaic vox speakers in your sarcophagus garbled the transmission. Surely these priests misspoke, using an honorific you are unfamiliar with, some title that only sounds like divine attribution. You test your voice for the first time in centuries, feeling the mechanical systems translate thought into sound. The result is a grinding bass rumble that reverberates through the chamber, a sound that would terrify mortal men and make even space marines pause in their duties. Every syllable is an effort, every word a negotiation between organic thought and mechanical expression. Brother Tech Marine, you manage, each word emerging like the grinding of tectonic plates. How long have I slept? The Tech Marine turns to face you fully, his helmet inclined, in what you recognize as respect. Venerable one, your last awakening was in the 41st Millennium's 9th century. By the Emperor's grace, you have slumbered for nearly 800 years of the chapter's protection. The current year is early M42, as we mark time in his divine wisdom. 42nd Millennium, 800 years. The numbers are staggering, but you have experienced this disorientation before with previous awakenings. Time means nothing to one who sleeps away the centuries. What troubles you more are the other words, that constant invocation of divine themes. The situation is grave enough to wake me, you ask, still testing your voice, still adjusting to the sensation of existence after so long in the void. Indeed, Ancient One, A Xenos threat has emerged in the sector, one that requires the wisdom of those who have fought the galaxy's wars since the days of the Great Crusade. You walked with the Primarchs themselves. You knew the Emperor's will directly, before he ascended to his eternal vigil upon the Golden Throne. Your counsel and might are invaluable in this dark hour. There it is again. Ascended, Golden Throne, divine wisdom. Each phrase, a discordant note in a symphony you remember playing very differently. You want to ask, to demand clarification, but protocol reasserts itself before confusion can voice its questions. You are Astartes, even trapped in this metal shell. You have been awakened because the chapter faces a threat. Your duty is clear, regardless of how strange the words around you might sound. I am ready to serve, you say, the words automatic, drilled into you through years of service that feel both distant and immediate. What enemy does the chapter face? The briefing that follows is mechanical, tactical, focused on numbers and dispositions and strategic considerations. The enemy is a splinter fleet of Tyranids, you are told, a designation that means nothing to you. The Tech Marine explains that they are a Xenos threat from beyond the galaxy, consuming all biomass in their path, a hunger that knows no satisfaction. Other terms are thrown at you that feel equally foreign. Hive ships, synapse creatures, genostealers, each explained in enough detail for you to understand the tactical situation, but leaving you with the disturbing realization that entire categories of threats exist that were unknown during your previous life. But you are a veteran of countless campaigns. You understand tactics and strategy, threat assessment, and force deployment. The specifics of the enemy matter less than the fundamental principles of war, which remain constant across the millennia. You absorb the briefing, ask clarifying questions, and begin formulating battle plans with the part of your mind that has always excelled at such calculations. It is only when the briefing concludes and the Tech Marine prepares to lead you from the awakening chamber that you finally voice the question that has been building since your first moments of consciousness. Brother, you say, the word feeling strange in your mechanical voice. Why do you call the Emperor a god? The Tech Marine stops. Even through his helmet, you can sense his confusion. Ancient One, I do not understand the question. The God Emperor has always been divine. He is the master of mankind, the Lord of Terror, the holy guardian of humanity. His light guides us through the warp. His will sustains us in battle. He sits upon the golden throne, eternal and immortal, watching over us all. Each sentence is a hammer blow. The conviction in the Tech Marine's voice is absolute, unquestioning, the certainty of someone stating the most fundamental truth of existence. He speaks of the Emperor's divinity the way you might speak of gravity or the passage of time, as an undeniable fact of reality that requires no justification or explanation. But, you begin, struggling to articulate thoughts that seem increasingly impossible to voice. The imperial truth, the Emperor's teachings. He denied his own divinity. He cast down religions. He forbade worship. Science and reason were to be, too, humanity's guides, not faith and superstition. The silence that follows your words is profound and uncomfortable. You can see the Tech Marine's helmet tilt, can imagine the confusion and concern that must be playing across his face beneath the ceramite. When he finally speaks, his voice carries a note of what might be pity. Venerable Ancient, he says carefully, choosing his words with obvious deliberation. You have slept long, very long. The galaxy has changed in ways that even one as august as yourself might struggle to comprehend. The imperial truth. He pauses, as if searching for the right way to explain something incomprehensible. The imperial truth was the Emperor's way of protecting humanity from dangers we did not understand. But his true divinity was always present, always guiding us. The ecclesiarchy teaches that the Emperor knew he was divine, but hid this truth until humanity was ready to embrace it. When he sacrificed himself fighting Horus the arch-traitor, when he took his place upon the golden throne to light humanity's path through the warp, his divinity became impossible to deny. Horus, the arch-traitor. Another name that strikes like a fist. Horus Lupercal, the War Master, the Emperor's most favored son. Betrayer? The idea is absurd, impossible. Horus was loyal beyond question, the greatest of all the Primarchs, the one the Emperor trusted above all others to lead the Great Crusade forward, while he returned to Terra for his secret work in the Imperial dungeon. What? Your voice fails for a moment, system struggling under the weight of emotions your mechanical form was never designed to properly express. What became of Horus, the War Master? The Tech Marine's posture stiffens, and you recognize the body language of someone preparing to deliver terrible news. Ancient One, I believe it would be better if you were briefed by the chapter master himself. The history you ask about is complex and painful. Events occurred after the Great Crusade that shaped everything that followed. The Horus Heresy was... Heresy. The word escapes you as something between a question and an accusation. Horus turned traitor. The War Master betrayed the Emperor. Not just the War Master, the Tech Marine says quietly. Half the legions followed him into damnation. Brothers turned on brothers. The galaxy burned. The Emperor was forced to slay his most beloved son with his own hands before being interred upon the Golden Throne for eternity. This happened 10,000 years ago, Ancient One. During your time, you must have some memory of those days. But you don't. Your last clear memories are of compliance actions, of worlds brought peacefully or forcefully into the Imperium, of the steady expansion of human space under the Emperor's banner. You remember being wounded. Remember the decision to place you in this sarcophagus so that your service might continue. But you have no memory of betrayal, no recollection of civil war. Perhaps you were already asleep when it happened. Perhaps the battle that nearly killed you occurred before Horus's betrayal became known. Or perhaps your organic memory, degraded by millennia in stasis, has simply lost those crucial details, the way a corrupted data file loses fragments of information. I want to see it, you say finally. Show me this Imperium. Show me what has become of the Emperor's dream. The Tech Marine hesitates, then nods slowly. As you command, Ancient One, but be prepared. The galaxy is not as you remember it. Much has been lost, much has changed, but we endure, by the Emperor's grace. We endure. He turns and begins walking toward the massive adamantine doors that lead from the awakening chamber. You follow, your footfalls shaking the floor, each step a ponderous boom of ceramite and metal on stone. As you move, you become aware of how your senses paint reality, how they transform the world into threat assessments and tactical data. But beneath the machine's cold logic, something very human churns with growing dread. You have awakened from centuries of sleep before. You have experienced the disorientation of lost time, the alienation of watching the galaxy change while you slumbered. But never has it felt like this. Never has the wrongness been so profound, so pervasive. God Emperor. Heresy. 10,000 years. The words circle in your thoughts like predators, each one a promise of horrors yet to be revealed. You are about to see what has become of the Imperium you fought to build, the grand vision of human reason and progress that the Great Crusade was meant to establish across the stars. Some part of you, the part that still remembers being human, the part that can still feel something like dread, whispers that you are not going to like what you discover. The doors open with a grinding of ancient mechanisms, revealing a corridor beyond, illuminated by flickering lumen strips. The walls are covered in Gothic script that you can read but find disturbingly focused on prayers and benedictions rather than practical information. Every surface seems to bear some form of religious iconography, the aquila worn and repeated until it loses all meaning, becoming mere decoration rather than symbol. As you emerge into the fortress monastery proper, you begin to understand that the wrongness goes deeper than mere words. This is not the Imperium you remember. This is something else entirely, something that wears its skin, but has lost its soul. And you, Ancient One, carry within your failing organic memory the knowledge of what was lost. You alone remember the true vision, the real purpose behind the Great Crusade. You alone can measure the distance between the dream and this nightmare reality. The question that follows you as you walk deeper into the changed Imperium is simple and terrible. Would it have been better to never wake at all? The memories come to you in fragments as you move through the fortress monastery, each step triggering recollections from a life that feels increasingly like it belonged to someone else. You remember the Great Crusade not as distant history, but as lived experience, visceral and immediate, in a way that the degraded present around you can never be. You remember your legion in the glory days, before it was broken into chapters, when it was a unified force tens of thousands strong. You remember the face of your Primarch, his features so clear in memory that it aches. He was more than human, certainly, but he was not divine. He was gene-forged perfection, a weapon crafted by the Emperor to lead humanity's expansion across the stars. He laughed at jokes and raged at incompetence and strategized over maps with the same intensity that any great general might display. He was your father in all the ways that mattered, but he was not a god. None of them were. You remember how it felt to be flesh and blood, to walk on your own legs and grip a bolter in hands of meat and bone rather than armored steel. The sensation of wind on your face during deployments to newly compliant worlds. The taste of Victory Feast recaf, bitter and hot, shared with brothers whose names you struggle now to recall. The weight of power armor distributed properly across a body designed to bear it, so different from this hulking chassis that makes every movement a conscious effort. You remember standing in formation as the Primarch addressed the Legion before a particularly difficult compliance. The target world had developed sophisticated void defenses and possessed a standing army equipped with Dark Age of technology weapons that made them dangerous despite their numerical inferiority. Intel suggested they had been influenced by Xenos advisors, though whether Ildari or something else remained unclear. Your Primarch spoke of duty and honor, of the importance of bringing this world into the Imperium, not simply for conquest, but for protection. Humanity had to unite to survive, he explained. The galaxy was vast and hostile, filled with threats that would consume isolated human worlds one by one if left unchecked. Only together, only as a unified species under the Emperor's guidance, could humanity claim its rightful place among the stars. There was idealism in those words, genuine belief in the righteousness of the cause. The Great Crusade was not merely about conquest, though conquest was certainly part of it. It was about saving scattered pockets of humanity from isolation and ignorance, about bringing them into a civilization that could protect them from the horrors of the galaxy. Did that idealism excuse the violence? Did the noble goal justify the methods? These are questions that occurred to you even then, in those distant days when you still possessed the luxury of moral contemplation. How many cities did you help reduce to rubble because their leaders refused compliance? How many populations did you witness purged because they clung to religions that could not be tolerated under the imperial truth? The answers haunted you then and haunt you still, even locked in this metal prison where human emotions struggle to find expression through mechanical systems. But you always told yourself that the alternative was worse. Without the Imperium, those worlds would fall to Xenos predation or chaos cults, or 1,000 other fates that ended in extinction or suffering beyond measure. The crusade was cruel, yes, but necessary. It was the blade that cut away infected flesh so that the patient might survive. The patient, humanity itself, scattered and vulnerable, waiting to be gathered and protected. You remember the Emperor as you saw him during the rare occasions when his presence graced your legion. He was tall, impossibly so, his golden armor catching light in ways that seemed to defy natural physics. When he spoke, the very air seemed to carry more weight, as if reality itself leaned in to hear his words. Power radiated from him in palpable waves, psychic might barely contained within even that magnificent form. But he never presented himself as a god. Never. He was the emperor, certainly, master of the Imperium and commander of the crusade. He demanded obedience and received it without question. But he spoke in practical terms about practical matters: resources, logistics, strategies for dealing with specific threats. He discussed the Primarchs as his sons, his finest creations, but created all the same, gene-forged, not divinely begotten. You remember one incident with particular clarity. A remembrancer, one of the artists and historians who documented the crusade, had included religious overtones in a piece depicting the emperor's unification of terror. The work presented him as a divine figure, descending to save humanity from itself, wreathed in holy light and attended by angelic servants. The emperor's response was swift and unequivocal. The work was destroyed. The remembrancer was reassigned to menial duties on some distant world, and the emperor himself addressed the legion during which this incident had occurred, speaking about the dangers of allowing mysticism to corrupt rational thought. "I am not a god," he said, his voice carrying to every warrior present. "I am a man who has lived long and learned much, who has witnessed humanity's highest achievements and its most catastrophic failures. I have seen what happens when faith and superstition are allowed to poison civilization. The old night came about not simply from warp storms and Xeno's aggression, but from humanity turning away from reason and embracing the irrational. We will not make that mistake again. The imperial truth is not merely propaganda. It is the foundation upon which humanity's future must be built. Remember this always." The conviction in his words was absolute. This was not a god hiding his nature, not a divine being concealing its true essence until the proper time. This was an extraordinarily powerful man who understood the dangers of religious thinking and was determined to prevent its return. And now, 10,000 years later, you awaken to find an Imperium that has made the Emperor into precisely what he never wanted to be: a god, an object of worship, the centerpiece of a religious cult that spans the galaxy. The imperial truth, that carefully constructed philosophy meant to free humanity from superstition, has been completely inverted. Everything the Emperor fought against, everything he sought to destroy, has been resurrected and placed at the very heart of the Imperium that bears his name. The irony would be darkly amusing if it were not so utterly, horrifically tragic. You remember the iterators, those specialized orators who spread the imperial truth to newly compliant worlds. They were skilled rhetoricians, trained to dismantle religious arguments and present the case for secular rationalism in terms that even the most indoctrinated populations could understand. You watched them work on dozens of worlds, saw how they carefully, methodically, broke down faith systems that had persisted for thousands of years. The techniques were sometimes gentle, sometimes harsh, always thorough. Religious leaders were discredited, their supernatural claims exposed as fraud or delusion. Scientific explanations were provided for phenomena that locals had attributed to divine intervention. The benefits of imperial membership were emphasized, the protection and prosperity that would come from joining civilization rather than remaining in superstitious isolation. And when words failed, when populations refused to abandon their faiths, then force was applied. Not enthusiastically, not with religious fervor, but as a sad necessity. Those who could not be educated would not be permitted to spread their delusions to others. The Emperor's dream of a rational, enlightened humanity could not be allowed to fail because of stubborn devotion to obsolete beliefs. It was brutal, certainly. Entire priesthoods were executed. Holy sites were demolished. Religious texts were burned in pyres that lit the night skies of compliant worlds. You participated in these actions. You guarded the iterators as they worked, and you enforced their mandates when resistance proved too strong. You told yourself it was necessary. You believed in the imperial truth, believed that humanity needed to cast off the chains of religion to achieve its full potential. The short-term suffering would be justified by the long-term liberation of the human mind from supernatural delusion. And now you discover that all of it, every religious text burned and every priest executed and every holy site demolished, was ultimately meaningless. Because the very Imperium that enforced this philosophical purge has itself become the greatest religious cult in human history, worshipping as a god the man who most adamantly insisted he was nothing of the sort. The question forms in your mechanical mind with the weight of absolute blasphemy. Did we kill all those people for nothing? You remember your last battle as a flesh and blood warrior with particular intensity. The details remain sharp, even after millennia in stasis, perhaps because trauma burns memories into neural pathways with exceptional clarity, even enhanced Astartes' neural pathways. The enemy was a xenos species you'd never encountered before, silicon-based lifeforms that inhabited the crust of a mineral-rich world your expedition fleet had targeted for mining operations. First contact had gone poorly, with the aliens regarding human presence as an intolerable infection. What followed was a grinding campaign through underground tunnel systems, where standard tactics and superior firepower provided less advantage than usual. Your company was deep in the enemy tunnels when the collapse occurred. Seismic weapons, either by design or accident, brought down thousands of tons of rock. Most of your brothers were fast enough to escape. You were not. You remember the weight. That's what stays with you most clearly across the centuries. Not the pain, though there was plenty of that. Not the fear, though even Astartes feel fear when death comes calling. But the weight, the incredible crushing pressure of a mountain falling on your power-armored form. Your armor held, at least partially. The blessed ceramite and adamantium withstood pressures that would have instantly pulped an unarmored human. But it held only in some places. In others, it buckled and cracked, and rock forced its way into the gaps, crushing flesh and bone with geological patience. You remember thinking, with the odd clarity that sometimes comes in moments of extreme crisis, that this was a stupid way to die. Not in glorious battle against the enemies of the Imperium, not standing defiant as overwhelming odds finally wore you down, but buried in rock in a tunnel that would likely never be excavated. Your body would remain here, entombed until geological processes ground even ceramite to dust. But your legion did not abandon its own. They dug. For hours that must have felt like days. They excavated your position. When they finally reached you, the apothecary's prognosis was grim. Catastrophic damage to your lower body, spinal injury that had paralyzed everything below your waist, internal bleeding that even Astartes' physiology was struggling to contain. "We can save him," the apothecary said, and you remember thinking that the pause before that statement lasted just a beat too long. But not as he is. The damage is too extensive for conventional healing. His body cannot be rebuilt. But his mind, his experience, his service to the Imperium need not end. You knew what he meant even before he said it. You'd seen dreadnoughts before, those massive war machines that stalked through battlefields with firepower exceeding entire squads of standard Astartes. You'd never thought about what went into them, never considered the process by which a fallen warrior was placed within such a machine. The thought terrified you. To give up your body, to become nothing more than a brain suspended in fluids, connected to a war machine for the rest of your indefinitely extended life. Never to feel wind again, never to taste victory recaf, never to simply walk on two legs without shaking the ground with every step. But the alternative was death. Not glorious death in battle, but death by medical failure, bleeding out in a recovery bay with nothing to show for it. Your gene seed would be harvested, certainly, your genetic legacy passed on to future Astartes. But you, your consciousness and experience and hard-won tactical knowledge would be lost. The Primarch himself came to your bedside, a honor that still fills you with a complicated mix of pride and sorrow. He looked down at your shattered form and spoke words you've replayed in your mechanical memory countless times over the millennia. "The choice is yours, my son," he said, his voice carrying that mixture of authority and affection that only he could achieve. "I will not command you to accept this fate. The path of the Dreadnought is one of honor, but it is also one of burden. You will serve far longer than any battle brother could expect to live. You will see generations come and go. You will become more monument than man, more relic than warrior. But your service will continue. Your knowledge will be preserved. And in dark times ahead, your presence will inspire others to stand firm when lesser warriors would falter." Dark times ahead. The phrase echoes now with prophetic weight. Did he know? Did the Primarch have some inkling that betrayal was coming? That the galaxy would soon burn in civil war? Or was it simply the acknowledgement that service in the Astartes was always a journey through dark times? That peace was only ever temporary in a hostile galaxy? You accepted. Of course you accepted. You were Astartes, bred and trained for service, for duty, for the protection of humanity, regardless of personal cost. Your fear of what you would become was less important than your obligation to continue fighting for the Imperium. The surgery was extensive. They removed everything that wasn't absolutely necessary, reducing you to a biological core that could be sustained by the Dreadnought's life support systems. Brain, major organs, enough of the spine to maintain neural connections. Everything else was gone, your body pared down to its absolute minimum. When you awakened in the sarcophagus for the first time, the disorientation was total. You had no body. You were a consciousness floating in warm fluid, connected to a machine through neural links that translated thought into action. Moving required learning to operate an entirely new form, one that responded to your commands, but felt nothing like the body you'd inhabited for over a century. They gave you time to adapt, months of training to relearn movement, to understand your new weapon systems, to adjust to the sensory inputs that now defined your reality. It was like being a neophyte again, struggling to master abilities that others seemed to deploy effortlessly. But you learned, you adapted. By the time they deployed you back into combat, you had achieved something approaching facility with your new form. You were not what you had been, but you were effective. Your tactical knowledge remained intact. Your targeting systems allowed for precision that exceeded what you'd achieved with organic eyes, and your firepower could turn the tide of engagements that would have been beyond a single flesh-and-blood Marine. You served well. For decades, you fought alongside your brothers, a respected ancient whose counsel was valued and whose presence inspired. You were there for compliance actions on dozens of worlds. You broke enemy lines that had held against conventional assault. You turned defeats into victories through sheer firepower and refusal to yield ground. Then came orders to return to the fortress monastery for system maintenance. Standard procedure, they said. The Tech Marines needed to check your systems, perform routine upgrades, ensure your war machine remained battle-ready. It would take a few weeks at most, then you'd be returned to combat operations. But during the maintenance cycle, they put you to sleep. Just temporarily, they assured you, while they worked on your most sensitive systems. You'd wake in a few days, refreshed and ready. That was your last memory as a warrior of the Great Crusade. Going into stasis for routine maintenance, expecting to wake shortly and return to the eternal war. Instead, you slept for 10,000 years, missing the single most important event in Imperial history. You went to sleep in an Imperium devoted to reason and science, led by an emperor who insisted he was not divine. You wake now in an Imperium drowning in superstition and religious fervor, where that same emperor is worshipped as a god by trillions who have never known anything else. The galaxy you fought to create is gone. In its place is something you barely recognize, something that wears its name but has betrayed every principle it was founded upon. And you, Ancient One, you alone carry the memory of what was lost. You alone can measure the distance between the dream and the nightmare. You alone understand just how completely and absolutely the Emperor's vision has failed. The weight of that knowledge crushes you worse than all that mountain rock ever could. The fortress monastery is wrong in ways that accumulate with every corridor you traverse, every chamber you pass through, every brother you encounter. The wrongness is not obvious at first, not any single dramatic change that declares itself immediately. Instead, it manifests as 1,000 small corruptions, deviations from what you remember that compound into something utterly alien. The architecture itself is the first clue. You remember fortress monasteries as functional spaces, certainly impressive in their scale and defensive capabilities, but ultimately designed with practical military concerns in mind. Every element served a purpose. Armories positioned for optimal equipment distribution, training halls sized to accommodate entire companies, command centers configured for efficient tactical coordination. This monastery bears those same functional bones, but they're buried beneath layers of religious ornamentation that transform pragmatic military space into what can only be described as a cathedral. Every corridor is lined with statuary depicting the emperor and various saints whose names mean nothing to you. Alcoves that once held ammunition or equipment now house prayer shrines, their eternal flames burning before icons that range from crude to masterfully artistic. The walls are covered in scripture, not tactical information, not inspirational quotes from the primarchs or strategic maxims from ancient military texts, but religious devotions, prayers to the emperor, litanies about his divine might, quotes attributed to him that you don't recognize, phrased in language he never would have used, presenting concepts he explicitly rejected. "The Emperor protects," reads one massive inscription that spans an entire wall. Below it, in smaller text, "Faith is my shield, his will my sword. In his name do I smite the heretic, the mutant, the alien, for I am the instrument of his divine vengeance." You stop, your massive form causing the tech marine escorting you to halt as well. You read the inscription again, parsing each word, trying to understand how this could exist in an imperial fortress monastery. "Brother," you say, your mechanical voice laden with confusion. This is everything the Emperor opposed. Faith as a shield, divine vengeance. These concepts are antithetical to the imperial truth. The tech marine follows your gaze to the inscription, seemingly confused by your confusion. "Ancient One, these are the words of Saint Macarius, one of the greatest heroes of the Imperium. His crusade reclaimed over 1,000 worlds in the Emperor's name. Every warrior knows his wisdom." "But they're wrong," you press, struggling to articulate the problem to someone who seems genuinely unable to see it. The Emperor explicitly rejected faith. He taught that reason and science were to guide humanity, not belief in divine protection. The tech marine is quiet for a long moment, and you can sense his discomfort through his body language, the way his armor shifts slightly as he searches for words. "Venerable Ancient, I mean no disrespect, but the teachings you reference are not commonly known in this age. The Emperor's wisdom is interpreted through the ecclesiarchy now, and they teach that faith in his divinity is the bedrock of imperial civilization." "The ecclesiarchy," you repeat, the word foreign on your Vox speakers. "What is the ecclesiarchy?" "The Adeptus Ministorum," he explains, clearly surprised you need this clarification. "The organization that administers the imperial cult across all loyal worlds. Their priests spread the Emperor's word and ensure proper worship is maintained. They are one of the primary pillars of imperial governance." Each sentence is a revelation of horror. A priesthood, administrative structures devoted to religion, mandatory worship. Every element represents something the Emperor fought to eliminate, now apparently enshrined at the heart of the Imperium itself. "And this is accepted?" you ask, knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. "The Imperium supports this religious organization." Supports it. The tech marine sounds genuinely baffled now. "Ancient One, The Ministorum is the Imperium in many ways. Their confessors march with guard regiments to ensure morale remains high. Their missionaries convert newly discovered human worlds to proper worship. Their preachers inspire civilians to resist even in the face of certain death. The faith they promulgate is what binds the Imperium together across its million worlds. Million worlds. Another impossible number, though your tactical database notes that during your time, the Crusade had brought perhaps 100,000 worlds into compliance. The Imperium has expanded dramatically in the millennia you slept, even as it apparently abandoned every philosophical principle that originally defined it. You continue walking, but now you're actively examining everything you pass with new eyes, cataloging the depth of change. The brothers you encounter in the corridors are all engaged in some form of religious observance. Some pray before shrines. Others carry prayer beads, murmuring devotions as they walk. One group is engaged in a call and response prayer, their voices echoing through the vaulted space in a way that would have been unthinkable during the Great Crusade. These are Space Marines, enhanced warriors created to be rational, logical, efficient instruments of military might. And they're praying, actually praying, with all the reverence and devotion that implies. The sight is so alien that you almost stumble, your massive form lurching slightly as your concentration wavers. Your memories of Legion life are filled with many things, brotherhood and duty and training and combat preparation, but never prayer. Religious devotion was not simply discouraged, it was actively suppressed. An Astartes caught in devotional activity would have faced disciplinary action, re-education at minimum. Now it's apparently standard practice. A young Marine, his armor bearing the markings of a recent inductee, approaches one of the shrines as you pass. He kneels before it with practiced ease, makes the sign of the Aquila across his chest, and begins reciting a prayer you don't recognize. The words flow easily from him, memorized through countless repetitions, as natural to his routine as checking his bolter or maintaining his armor. Emperor, master of mankind, lord of terror, protector of humanity, he intones, his voice carrying the fervor of genuine belief. Grant me strength in battle, courage in the face of the enemy, faith when doubt threatens to overwhelm. Let me serve you as you serve humanity, a holy warrior in your eternal crusade. By your will and your grace do I fight. In your name do I slay the heretic and cleanse the unclean. For you are God, and I am your instrument. The prayer ends, and the young Marine rises, makes the Aquila again, and continues on his way, apparently unaware of the existential horror his devotions have inspired in the ancient watching him. That prayer, you manage, your Vox speakers struggling to properly modulate the distress in your mechanical voice. It's religious, genuinely religious. He believes the Emperor is a god. Of course he does, the Tech Marine replies, and there's a note of concern creeping into his voice now. Ancient One, all faithful Imperial citizens believe the Emperor is divine. It is the foundation of our entire civilization. How could it be otherwise? How indeed. You're beginning to understand that this is not some temporary aberration, some local cult that has infected a single chapter. This is systemic, galaxy-wide, accepted without question by even the Astartes themselves. The entire Imperium has embraced precisely the type of religious thinking the Emperor fought to eliminate. You pass through a training hall where dozens of brothers are engaged in combat drills. Their technique is excellent, their discipline evident, but between each round of sparring, they pause to recite prayers of martial prowess, asking the Emperor's blessing on their weapons and their cause. Religious practice has been seamlessly integrated into every aspect of their military routine. A librarian passes by, his psychic hood crackling with barely contained power. You remember librarians from your time, valued specialists whose understanding of the warp made them invaluable, despite the risks they represented. But this librarian carries prayer scrolls attached to his armor, and you hear him murmuring what sound like devotional mantras as he walks. as if his psychic power is somehow connected to religious faith, rather than biological mutation and careful training. The wrongness compounds with every observation until you feel like your consciousness is drowning in it. This is not your Imperium. This cannot be what the Great Crusade was building toward. Every surface covered in religious iconography, every brother engaged in devotional practice, every conversation laden with invocations of divine will. You begin to understand why the Tech Marine seems so concerned about your questions, why your confusion about basic tenets of imperial life troubles him. To these warriors, the Emperor's divinity is self-evident truth, as fundamental as gravity or the need for air. Your questioning of it must seem like madness, or perhaps the confusion of an ancient whose mind has degraded during long sleep. But your mind is not degraded. Your memories, however fragmentary in places, are clear on this point. The Emperor was not a god. He never claimed divinity. The entire imperial truth was built on the rejection of supernatural thinking. So what happened? How did the Imperium transform so completely from philosophical rationalism to religious fervor? The question burns in your mind, demanding answer. The library, you say suddenly, interrupting the Tech Marine's explanation of some tactical detail you were only partially processing. Does this monastery maintain historical archives? Of course, Venerable Ancient. The chapter's history is carefully preserved. Every battle, every honor, every fallen brother is recorded for posterity. I want to see records from the heresy, you say, making it a command rather than a request. I want to understand what happened, how the Imperium changed, why. You trail off, unable to properly articulate the scope of your confusion, why everything you fought for was abandoned, why the Emperor's explicit wishes were disregarded, why an atheistic empire of reason became a theocratic nightmare of superstition. The Tech Marine's body language suggests reluctance, but he cannot refuse a direct request from an ancient. As you command, I will escort you to the librarium, but Ancient One, I must warn you that the history of the heresy is painful. Even reading about it 10,000 years after the events, the betrayal still cuts deep. You may find the accounts distressing. Distressing. The understatement would be amusing if your capacity for amusement hadn't been largely eliminated along with your body. You're already distressed. You're already drowning in revelations that overturn everything you believed about the Imperium you serve. What's a little more distress added to the pile? The librarium is vast, a cathedral of knowledge that stretches through multiple levels of the fortress monastery. Thousands of tomes line the shelves, ranging from ancient physical books, protected behind climate-controlled viewing screens, to data crystals containing compressed archives that would take lifetimes to fully review. Servitors tend the collection, their lobotomized minds ideally suited to the mechanical task of preservation without comprehension. You recognize none of this organization. The libraries you remember were functional spaces, certainly extensive, but organized according to practical categories: tactical manuals, historical records, cultural databases about conquered worlds, information stored for utility, catalogued for efficient retrieval. This space is organized like a shrine. The most prominent position, at the very center of the main hall, houses a massive tome entitled the Lectitio Divinitatus. Even from a distance, you can see it's been given pride of place, raised on a plinth and surrounded by devotional candles. The book is ancient, its pages protected behind armored glass, but still clearly readable. The foundational text, the Tech Marine explains, his voice carrying reverence, written by the Primarch Lorgar himself during the Great Crusade, though its wisdom was not fully appreciated until after the Emperor's ascension to the Golden Throne. It lays out the theological arguments for his divinity, explaining why he is not merely human, but the literal god of mankind. Lorgar. The name triggers fragmentary memories. You knew of Lorgar, Primarch of the Wordbearers Legion. You remember hearing that his legion's compliance actions were slow, that they spent excessive time building monuments and establishing worship practices on conquered worlds. You remember rumors that the emperor himself had censured Lorgar for these delays, that the word-bearers had been humiliated before the other legions as an example of what not to do. Now you're being told that Lorgar's religious texts are the foundational documents of the modern Imperium's state religion. The very practices that got him censured became mandatory for all Imperial citizens. The irony is so crushing, you feel your reactor stress under the emotional load. "Show me the heresy records," you say, your voice flat, mechanical, stripped of the roiling confusion beneath. "I want to understand what happened." The Tech Marine leads you to a section labeled Holy History of the Traitors' War. More religious framing, even for the greatest military conflict in Imperial history. He retrieves a data crystal containing compressed archives and loads it into a viewing station adapted for your massive frame. What unfolds before your optical senses is a nightmare of betrayal and violence that makes the endless crusade battles you remember seem almost quaint by comparison. Horus, greatest of the Primarchs, turned traitor. The data files claim he was corrupted by the ruinous powers, entities dwelling in the warp that you have no memory of encountering or even hearing about during your service. These chaos gods, as they're labeled, apparently turned Horus against the Emperor through manipulation and supernatural corruption. Half the legions followed him. Brothers you remember fighting alongside, warriors whose loyalty seemed unquestionable, declared for the traitor and turned their weapons on their kin. The galaxy burned in civil war that lasted years and consumed billions of lives. The casualty figures are staggering beyond comprehension. Trillions dead, entire segmentums laid waste, worlds destroyed utterly, their populations exterminated to the last child. This wasn't war as you knew it, calculated compliance actions with clear objectives. This was genocidal fury, brother killing brother across the full span of Imperial space. You read about the drop site massacre at Istvan V, where loyalist legions were ambushed and nearly destroyed by traitors they'd thought were allies. You read about the siege of Terra itself, traitor forces actually reaching Holy Terra and threatening the Emperor's palace while he was confined below ground working on some project the archives refer to mysteriously as the Imperial Webway. And you read about the final confrontation, the Emperor boarding Horus's flagship, the duel between father and corrupted son, the Emperor mortally wounding Horus, but receiving wounds so severe that only immediate intervention saved his life, if what followed can be called life. The Golden Throne, an ancient device of mysterious origins, originally intended for some purpose related to the Webway project, repurposed as a life support system for the Emperor's shattered form. He has sat upon that throne for 10,000 years, neither living nor dead, maintained by a device whose workings are only partially understood and requiring constant sacrifice to function. The records speak of psychers, thousands of them, sacrificed daily to the Golden Throne to sustain the Emperor's continued existence. Their souls consumed to power the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon that allows navigation through the warp. Without this sacrifice, without the Emperor's presence powering the beacon, interstellar travel would become impossible, and the Imperium would fragment into isolated pockets. Each revelation is a hammer blow, each detail another piece of a puzzle you never wanted to solve. The Great Crusade didn't just fail, it collapsed into civil war that nearly destroyed everything the Emperor built. And the Emperor himself, that impossibly powerful figure who seemed beyond mortality, was brought low by his own son's betrayal. But that doesn't explain the religious transformation. None of this explains why the imperial truth was abandoned in favor of superstitious worship. You dig deeper into the archives, searching for the transition point, the moment when the Imperium embraced the very beliefs it had fought to eliminate. The answer, when you find it, is almost mundane in its bureaucratic inevitability. After the heresy, after the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne, the Imperium fractured into a governing structure called the Senatorum Imperialis. 12 high lords administering different aspects of imperial governance, coordinating through consensus rather than centralized command. No single figure possessed the emperor's authority to enforce cultural mandates like the imperial truth. And into this power vacuum came the cults. They had always existed on the fringes, underground worship of the emperor, despite his own rejection of divinity. The Lectitio Divinitatus had inspired secret believers even before the heresy. Now, with the emperor absent and his explicit prohibitions no longer enforceable, these cults emerged into the open. They spread rapidly through a population traumatized by civil war and desperate for hope. The emperor may have rejected worship, but he had also saved humanity from Horus's betrayal at terrible personal cost. His sacrifice seemed to demand recognition, veneration, the kind of devotion that philosophy alone could not inspire. Within a few centuries, worship of the emperor had become so widespread that suppressing it would have required military action against the Imperium's own citizens. The High Lords, pragmatic if nothing else, recognized that religious unity might provide the social cohesion that the imperial truth had failed to maintain. If the population wanted to worship the emperor as a god, and if that worship kept them loyal and productive, why fight it? By M32, the Temple of the Savior Emperor had achieved official recognition, later reorganizing into the Adeptus Ministorum. What had been forbidden became mandatory. What the emperor explicitly rejected became the cornerstone of imperial ideology. The records frame this as positive development. They claim the imperial cult provided the faith necessary to endure 10,000 years of grinding conflict against endless enemies. They suggest that the emperor's true wisdom was revealed through his sacrifice, that his divinity became impossible to deny once he took his place upon the golden throne. But you remember the emperor's explicit words, his fervent rejection of religious thinking, his insistence that superstition and faith were chains humanity needed to cast off. Nothing in these archives suggests he changed his mind. Nothing indicates he wanted this. The modern Imperium has made him into the very thing he despised most. You deactivate the viewing station, your optical sensors dimming as you process what you've learned. The silence in the librarium is profound, broken only by the quiet mechanical sounds of servitors going about their preservation duties. Ancient One, the Tech Marine's voice carries concern. Do you require maintenance? Your power signatures are fluctuating in ways that suggest distress. Distress? Such an inadequate word for what you're experiencing. Your consciousness is trapped in a metal shell, your ability to express emotion reduced to fluctuating power readings and vox modulations. But what you feel transcends the mechanical limitations of your current form. Grief. Bottomless, crushing grief for everything that was lost. The Great Crusade's idealistic vision of a rational, enlightened humanity. The Emperor's dream of a species united by reason rather than divided by superstition. The hope that humanity could transcend its worst impulses and claim a better future. All of it gone. All of it abandoned or betrayed or simply forgotten by succeeding generations who never knew anything different. I need to speak with your chapter master, you say finally, your voice carrying an authority that brooks no argument. I need to understand how this is acceptable, how the Imperium can so completely abandon everything it was meant to be. The Tech Marine shifts uncomfortably. Ancient One, I must warn you that questioning the Emperor's divinity is dangerous. The ecclesiarchy does not tolerate such skepticism, even from honored ancients, even from those who knew the Emperor personally. The ecclesiarchy, you repeat, loading, the word with as much mechanical scorn as your Vox speakers can convey. The Emperor would have burned every ecclesiarch alive for blasphemy, for daring to make him into something he explicitly rejected being. This entire religious structure is the greatest betrayal of his vision imaginable. The silence that follows your words is tense and dangerous. You can sense the Tech Marine's internal conflict, caught between respect for your ancient status and alarm at what could be construed as heretical statements. Finally, he speaks, choosing his words very carefully. Ancient One, I understand that the galaxy you wake to must seem strange, wrong even, but I beg you to consider that 10,000 years of history cannot be dismissed. The faith that sustains the Imperium is not some aberration. It is the foundation of our civilization, the bulwark against chaos, the reason humanity has not fallen despite endless threats. Whatever the Emperor's original intentions, the Imperium evolved to meet needs he could not have foreseen. The faith is not betrayal, it is adaptation, survival. You want to argue. You want to explain all the ways this reasoning is flawed, how it justifies abandoning principles through pragmatic cowardice. But you're beginning to understand that words will not penetrate the certainty you're facing. This tech marine, this chapter, this entire Imperium has been raised from birth in a belief system so pervasive that questioning it is literally inconceivable. They don't know what was lost. They never experienced the imperial truth as lived reality. To them, the Emperor has always been a god. Faith has always been mandatory. And the religious organization of the Imperium has always been normal. You are alone in your knowledge, alone in your memory, alone in your grief for a dream that died 10,000 years ago. Take me to the chapter master, you repeat, your voice hollow. Let me speak with someone who might understand. The tech marine nods, clearly relieved to be moving on from this uncomfortable conversation. As you follow him from the librarium, you become aware of just how profoundly isolated you are. Everyone around you speaks a language you technically understand, but that references concepts and beliefs you find abhorrent. They worship what you fought to eliminate. They embrace what you were taught to reject. You are a relic from a dead age, preserved by accident and technology, waking to find yourself in a nightmare future that wears the Imperium's face, but has lost its soul. And the question that haunts you, that will follow you through however many more millennia of service you're forced to endure, is simple and terrible. Would it have been better if they'd let you die in that tunnel collapse? If you'd been granted the peace of final death rather than this half-life as a witness to failure? If you'd been spared the knowledge of how completely and utterly the Emperor's dream was abandoned? You have no answer. Only the certainty that you will carry this burden until your reactor finally fails, or an enemy finally destroys the shell that imprisons your consciousness. Some fates, you're beginning to understand, are genuinely worse than death. Chapter Master's sanctum is located in the highest spire of the fortress monastery, a deliberate architectural choice that forces anyone seeking audience to traverse the full height of the structure. You ascend through levels, each one revealing new layers of the modern Imperium's character. Training halls where brothers hone their skills between prayer sessions. Arming chambers where weapons are blessed as often as they are maintained. Meditation cells whose function has transformed from tactical contemplation into religious devotion. Every space repurposed, every function reinterpreted through the lens of faith. The chapter master's sanctum itself is part war room, part shrine. Tactical displays share wall space with religious iconography. Battle standards hang beside prayer scrolls. The duality encapsulates everything you find wrong about the modern Imperium. Military function married to religious fervor in ways that would have been unthinkable during the Great Crusade. The chapter master himself is an imposing figure, even by Astarte's standards. His armor bears the scars of centuries of warfare, each mar a story of battles fought and won. He studies you with eyes that have seen more than most mortals could endure, and when he speaks, his voice carries the weight of absolute authority. Ancient One, he greets you, making the sign of the Aquila. It is an honor to have one who knew the Emperor directly among us. Your service across the millennia is legend within the chapter. The Tech Marines tell me your reawakening has been complicated. Chapter Master, you respond, your mechanical voice carrying less respect than it probably should. I need to understand. I have studied the records. I have seen what the Imperium has become, and I cannot reconcile what I see with what I remember, with what the Emperor explicitly taught and commanded. He regards you silently for a long moment, and you sense calculation behind his gaze. Finally, he dismisses the tech marine and other attendants with a gesture, leaving just the two of you in the sanctum. When he speaks again, his tone has shifted subtly, becoming less formal, more direct. You remember the imperial truth, he says, and it's not a question. You remember when the Emperor forbade worship, when faith was treated as dangerous delusion to be eliminated. And now you wake to find the entire Imperium structured around precisely the kind of religious devotion he fought against. Yes, you say simply, surprised by his directness. The chapter master moves to one of the large windows, looking out over the fortress monastery grounds far below. When he speaks, his words carry a weariness that his authoritative bearing had concealed. There are very few of us who remember, he says quietly. Most dreadnoughts interred during the Crusade have either been destroyed in battle or degraded mentally to the point where their memories are unreliable. Most of my battle brothers know only what they've been taught, what the ecclesiarchy has decreed as truth. But he pauses, seeming to choose his words carefully. I have access to archives that most do not, records kept sealed for 10,000 years. And I know that what you're experiencing is not madness or confusion, but accurate memory colliding with intolerable change. The admission startles you. You'd expected denial, religious platitudes, attempts to convince you that your memories were somehow incorrect. Instead, you're facing something rarer and perhaps more disturbing: acknowledgement. Then you know, you say, the statement hanging in the air like an accusation. You know the Imperium has betrayed everything it was meant to be. Betrayed. He turns to face you directly. Perhaps, or perhaps adapted to survive threats that would have destroyed it otherwise. Ancient One, do you understand what we face now? The enemies arrayed against humanity. I fought Xenos during the Crusade, you reply, hearing the defensiveness in your mechanical voice. I know what threats the galaxy contains. Do you? He moves to a tactical display, activating it with a thought. What appears is a map of the galaxy that bears only superficial resemblance to what you remember. This is the Imperium in M42. 1 million worlds scattered across the stars. And everywhere, pressing in on all sides, are enemies the Great Crusade barely encountered. The display shifts, highlighting threats in different colors. Chaos forces emerging from the Eye of Terror, traitor legions that have been raiding Imperial space for 10,000 years, orc empires that dwarf anything faced during the Crusade, Tyranid hive fleets entering the galaxy from the void beyond, consuming everything in their path, Necrons awakening from millions of years of sleep with technology that makes ours look primitive, Eldar conducting their incomprehensible schemes, Tau expanding their empire on the eastern fringe, and 1,000 smaller threats, each one capable of exterminating humanity if we falter. Each threat is marked, categorized, assessed. The scope is staggering, the strategic situation a nightmare of multi-front conflicts, with no possibility of decisive victory. The Imperium doesn't advance anymore, he continues. It doesn't conquer and expand like it did during the Crusade. It simply endures, holding the line against threats that never stop coming. Every day, worlds fall. Every year, the enemy grows stronger while we struggle to maintain what we have. This has been true for 10,000 years. Do you understand what that does to a civilization? The psychological weight of endless defensive warfare with no hope of ultimate victory? I understand warfare, you say, but even as the words leave your vox speakers, you recognize their inadequacy. You understand warfare as you experienced it. Purposeful conflicts with clear objectives, battles that advanced the Great Crusade toward its goal of human unification. What he's describing is something different. Not war as a tool of policy, but war as a permanent state of existence. The faith, the chapter master says, returning to the core of your question, is what allows humanity to continue fighting when reason would counsel despair. When every tactical assessment suggests the Imperium cannot win, that it's only a matter of time before one threat or another breaks through and humanity faces extinction, it is faith that keeps soldiers at their posts, faith that their sacrifice serves a higher purpose, faith that the God Emperor watches over them, faith that ultimate victory is possible even when all evidence suggests otherwise. But it's a lie, you argue. The Emperor never wanted worship. He knew the dangers of religious thinking, how it could be corrupted and manipulated. The imperial truth was meant to protect humanity from precisely this kind of delusion. The imperial truth failed, he replies bluntly. It failed to hold the Imperium together during the heresy. It failed to provide citizens with the psychological resilience needed for endless warfare. It failed to create the unity it promised. So something else evolved in its place, something that succeeded where reason failed. The faith may be built on a foundation the Emperor would have rejected, but it works. It keeps the Imperium fighting, and in a galaxy this hostile, that is enough. Enough? Your voice rises, mechanical anger reverberating through the sanctum. Enough to abandon everything he stood for? Enough to transform his explicit vision into its complete opposite? The Emperor would be horrified by what the Imperium has become. Perhaps, the chapter master says quietly. Or perhaps he would recognize that survival requires sacrifices, even sacrifices of principle. We don't know what the Emperor thinks, locked on his golden throne for 10,000 years. We don't know if he even retains enough consciousness to think at all. We only know that the Imperium endures, and that the faith is part of what makes that endurance possible. The reasoning is seductive in its pragmatism, the kind of logic that sounds convincing until you examine its implications. Yes, the faith provides cohesion. Yes, it motivates soldiers and citizens to fight beyond reasonable expectation. But it also represents the death of everything the Great Crusade was meant to achieve. You speak of survival as if it's enough, you say. But what are we surviving for? What is the point of humanity's continued existence if we abandon reason, embrace superstition, and regress into the very ignorance the Emperor fought to eliminate? This Imperium is not what he envisioned. It's a twisted mockery of his vision, wearing his name while betraying every principle he held dear. The chapter master is silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally speaks, his voice carries a sadness that penetrates even your mechanical shell. You're right, he says simply. The Imperium has failed, not in the sense of ceasing to exist, but in the sense of abandoning the ideals that originally justified its existence. We became what we fought against. We embraced the superstition we sought to eliminate. We built an empire of fear and ignorance on the ruins of a dream about enlightenment and reason. The admission is stunning in its directness. You'd expected him to defend the modern Imperium, to argue for its necessity, regardless of its betrayal of original principles. Instead, you're hearing acknowledgement of failure from one of the Imperium's own masters. Then why, you ask? Why perpetuate it? Why not try to reclaim what was lost? He laughs, the sound bitter and harsh. And how would we do that, Ancient One? Should I declare the ecclesiarchy heretical and attempt to restore the imperial truth? I would be declared traitor before the words left my lips, excommunicated by the Inquisition, hunted by my own brothers who genuinely believe I was endangering their souls. The faith is too deeply embedded, too fundamental to how the Imperium functions. Trying to tear it out would trigger civil war that would make the heresy look like a minor disagreement. So you do nothing, you say, the accusation clear. You preserve a system you know to be wrong because changing it is too difficult. I preserve a system that keeps humanity alive, he corrects sharply. Wrong it may be, betrayal of original principles it certainly is, but it functions. It allows the Imperium to field armies, maintain production, coordinate defense across 1 million worlds. If I shattered that for the sake of ideological purity, the practical result would be humanity's extinction. Is that preferable to hypocrisy? You don't have an answer. The tactical part of your mind, the part that still thinks like a soldier, recognizes the logic. Sometimes the choice isn't between good options, but between different varieties of terrible. Sometimes survival requires tolerating things that would be intolerable under better circumstances. But the human part of you, the fragment of consciousness that remembers believing in the Great Crusade's idealistic vision, recoils from the pragmatism. If survival requires betraying every principle, becoming everything you fought against, then what exactly are you surviving for? I can see the conflict in your reaction, the chapter master observes. The struggle between your training and your conscience. Let me make this easier for you, Ancient One. You don't have to resolve this dilemma. You don't have to choose between ideological purity and practical necessity. You only have to do what you've always done. Serve, fight the enemies of humanity, protect the Imperium's citizens. The philosophical questions can be left to others. And what of truth, you ask? What of honesty about what we've become? He moves back to the window, looking out over the monastery grounds again. Truth is a luxury the Imperium can no longer afford. The citizens need faith to face the horrors they're born into. The soldiers need faith to charge into battles they statistically cannot win. Even many of my brothers need faith to maintain morale through decades of service with no end in sight. Taking that faith away, telling them it's based on lies and misunderstandings, would break them. So we maintain the lie because it's kinder than the truth. The conversation has circled back to the same fundamental point. Survival justifies anything. The Imperium has made a devil's bargain, trading its soul for continued existence, and now finds itself unable to reverse that trade without destroying itself in the process. You recognize that you're not going to change this chapter master's mind, any more than he could convince you that the betrayal of the Emperor's vision is acceptable. You exist on different sides of a philosophical divide too wide to bridge through mere argument. What would you have me do? You ask finally, the question carrying resignation rather than genuine inquiry. The same thing you did during the Great Crusade, he replies. Fight. Your tactical knowledge is invaluable. Your firepower can turn the tide of battles. Your very presence inspires those who fight alongside you. Does it matter what they believe about the Emperor if they fight effectively? Does their faith in his divinity make them less worthy of protection? The question is cleverly framed, forcing you to acknowledge that the individuals you'll fight beside are not themselves responsible for the Imperium's ideological corruption. The young Marine you saw praying earlier, the tech Marine who escorted you with such reverence, the countless brothers you'll serve with, none of them chose to be born into an Imperium of lies. They're victims of the same system you find abhorrent. I will fight, you say, because what else is there? You're a weapon, a war machine built to serve. Your personal feelings about the Imperium's direction don't change your fundamental purpose. But I will not embrace the lies. I will not pretend the Emperor wanted this. I will remember what was lost, even if no one else does. That is your right, the chapter master says, and for the first time you hear something that might be respect in his voice. And perhaps there's value in having someone who remembers, who can serve as living witness to what the Imperium was meant to be. Even if that witness is mostly silent, even if that memory changes nothing, perhaps it matters that someone knows. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's just an empty platitude, meaningless comfort offered to placate an ancient who has become inconveniently philosophical. You can't tell, and you're not sure it matters either way. The briefing that follows is thorough and professional. The chapter master outlines the tactical situation with the Tyrannid splinter fleet, discusses disposition of forces, solicits your input on strategy. For a while, you can lose yourself in the comfortable familiarity of military planning, the intellectual exercise of solving tactical problems through force deployment and maneuver. But even as you analyze threat vectors and calculate optimal firing positions, the undercurrent of wrongness persists. Everything about this Imperium feels like a betrayal. even when individuals within it act with honor and courage. The system itself is rotten, built on foundations of lies and sustained through willful ignorance of its own corruption. You are going to serve it anyway, because the alternative is to refuse service and face whatever consequences that brings, and because the individuals you'll fight beside deserve protection, regardless of the system they exist within. But you will never forgive the Imperium for what it's become. You will never accept the lies as truth, and you will carry, locked in your metal shell, the memory of what could have been, what should have been, if only the Great Crusade had succeeded in its true purpose. You are a monument to failure, Ancient One, a living reminder that ideals die even when civilizations endure. And there is no peace in that knowledge, no comfort in survival purchased at the cost of betrayed principles. There is only service, duty without belief, warfare without faith in the cause. You will fight because you were made to fight, because it's all you have left, because the habit of obedience runs deeper than any crisis of conscience. But you will remember, in the darkness between battles, in the long sleep between awakenings, you will remember what the Imperium was meant to be. And perhaps, if any small mercy exists in this nightmare galaxy, that memory will be enough to count as a form of resistance, as refusal to let the lies become complete. Perhaps. The deployment comes swiftly. Within hours of your audience with the chapter master, you're being loaded into a transport alongside strike forces assembled to meet the Tyranid threat. The process is familiar enough. Military routine that transcends the centuries. Weapons checks, tactical briefings, pre-battle preparations that look the same, whether conducted during the Great Crusade or 10,000 years later. But the differences accumulate in ways small and large. The warriors around you pause for prayers before boarding. Chaplains move through the ranks, offering blessings and invoking the Emperor's protection. Even the tech marines who supervise your loading murmur ritual, cant that blends technical specifications with religious devotion in ways that make your reactor stress. The other brothers treat you with a reverence that feels wrong. They speak to you as if you're a holy relic, rather than simply a veteran warrior. Some try to touch your hull as if contact with something that knew the God Emperor personally might confer some form of blessing. The superstitious nature of their devotion is painfully obvious to eyes that remember a more rational age. But their competence is undeniable. Whatever you think of their beliefs, these are skilled warriors who have trained for decades in the arts of warfare. Their weapons are well maintained, their tactical discipline is excellent, and their physical conditioning exceeds even what you remember from the Great Crusade. The Astartes project has refined itself over 10 millennia, producing warriors who are perhaps technically superior to your generation, even as they're intellectually enslaved to religious dogma. The ship that carries you to the war zone is a strike cruiser of a class you don't recognize. The technology has advanced in some ways, you note. More efficient reactors, improved void shields, weapon systems that benefit from 10,000 years of incremental refinement. But the ship is also covered in religious iconography that would have been forbidden during your time. Every surface bears prayers. Every corridor echoes with devotional chants from the ship's crew. You find yourself in one of the ship's tactical centers, studying displays that show the Tyranid threat in growing detail. The Xenos are unlike anything you encountered during the Crusade. They're not simply aliens to be fought and defeated, but a hunger-given form, a biological imperative to consume that knows no negotiation or mercy. The tactical challenges they present are unique, forcing adaptation of standard combat doctrines. A young sergeant approaches you with evident nervousness, his armor bearing the white cross of a squad leader. He makes the sign of the Aquila before speaking, the gesture so automatic it seems unconscious. "Ancient One," he says, his voice carrying awe that makes you uncomfortable. "My squad has been assigned to fight alongside you in the coming battle. It would be an honor if you would share your wisdom with us. We have never fought the Great Devourer before, and your experience across the millennia might help us avoid mistakes." The Great Devourer, another religious framing, presenting the Tyranids as some cosmic evil rather than simply a biological threat. But beneath the superstitious language, you recognize a reasonable request. This sergeant wants tactical advice from a veteran, wants to learn from someone who has survived countless battles. "Sergeant," you say, your mechanical voice softer than usual. "Tell me about your squad, their specializations, their experience, their capabilities." What follows is a tactical discussion that could have occurred during any era of Imperial history. The sergeant describes his warriors, their strengths and weaknesses, the weapons they favor, and the tactics they've trained in. You offer suggestions based on what you've learned about tyrannid behavior. Discuss optimal formations for fighting enemies that attack in overwhelming numbers. Explain the importance of fire discipline when ammunition conservation becomes critical. For a while, you're simply a warrior among warriors, sharing knowledge accumulated across centuries of combat. The ideological corruption of the Imperium fades into background noise, less important than the immediate practical concern of keeping these brothers alive in the coming battle. "You remind me of someone," you say unexpectedly, the words surprising even yourself. "A sergeant I knew during the Crusade. Same tactical instinct, same concern for his squad's welfare. He died well, holding a choke point so others could evacuate civilians from a hive under siege." The young sergeant's eyes widen. "You honor me with the comparison, Ancient One. To think that I might be worthy of—" "You are a sergeant," you interrupt, unable to tolerate the religious framing he's about to apply. "Nothing more, nothing less. A warrior who leads other warriors. That is honor enough without adding mystical significance. Do your duty well, keep your brothers alive, and you will have served with distinction." He seems momentarily taken aback by your directness, but then nods slowly. "I will do so, Ancient One. My squad will fight worthy of the Emperor's, of your expectations." He almost said God Emperor, but caught himself at the last moment, adjusting his language to match your clear discomfort with religious invocations. The gesture is small but significant, suggesting that even warriors raised in faith can recognize when that faith might not be universally shared. The transit through the warp is mercifully brief. You spend it in partial shutdown, conserving power and allowing your organic components to recover from the stress of reawakening. The dreams that come during these periods are fragmentary and strange, memories mixing with present observations to create surreal narratives that dissolve upon full consciousness. You dream of the Primarch as you last saw him, tall and proud and radiating certainty about the rightness of the crusade. But in the dream, his face is wrong, distorted by religious iconography that transforms him from gene-forged warrior into divine messenger. You try to tell him what became of the Imperium, how everything he fought for was abandoned, but no words emerge from your dream voice. He simply looks at you with eyes full of disappointment and asks why you didn't prevent this corruption. You wake from the dream with your reactor running hot, stress indicators flashing warnings that the tech marines rush to address. They assume it's a technical malfunction, some consequence of your ancient system struggling with reactivation. They don't understand that machines built around human minds can still dream, can still suffer from nightmares that stress biological and mechanical systems alike. The battle, when it comes, is chaos refined into biological form. The Tyranids attack in waves that defy rational tactics. They don't maneuver for advantage or seek to minimize casualties. They simply come, endless hordes of chittering claws and fangs, dying in thousands, but never breaking, never retreating, driven by a hunger that transcends any survival instinct. You anchor a defensive line alongside squads of tactical marines, your assault cannon speaking its deadly sermon as the Xenos tide breaks against your position. The familiar rhythm of warfare reasserts itself. Acquire target, fire, adjust aim, fire again, count ammunition, maintain firing discipline. The mechanical precision of combat has not changed across the millennia, but everything else has. The brothers fighting beside you pray between volleys, calling on the Emperor for strength and protection. Chaplains move through the ranks, their booming voices offering religious inspiration rather than tactical guidance. When brothers fall, their deaths are framed as martyrdom, sacrifice for the God Emperor's glory, rather than simply casualties in a necessary war. The sergeant you spoke with fights with skill and courage. His squad maintains excellent cohesion, covering each other's flanks and maintaining fire discipline despite the horror of endless Xenos pressing forward. When one of his brothers is wounded, dragged down by a Hormagaunt pack before you can redirect fire to assist, the sergeant kills the creatures and drags his brother to safety while reciting prayers you don't recognize. "The Emperor protects," he shouts, his voice carrying over the battlefield's cacophony. "Through faith we endure. For him on terror." And his brothers echo the cry, their faith translating into ferocity that throws back another wave of attackers. You cannot deny the practical effectiveness of their devotion, even as you remain repulsed by its superstitious nature. They fight harder because they believe their God watches and judges, because they genuinely think their souls are on the line along with their lives. The Tyranids don't care about anyone's faith. They attack with the single-minded intensity of organisms designed for nothing but consumption. But the faith allows these Imperials to match that intensity, to fight with a fanaticism that mirrors the enemy's biological imperative. The battle lasts for hours, ebbing and flowing as the Tyranids probe for weaknesses and the Imperial forces adjust to counter each new threat. You anchor position after position, your heavy weapons cutting down synapse creatures and reducing warrior forms to biological wreckage. The familiar weight of combat settles over you, that state of heightened awareness where everything slows and clarifies. This, at least, is unchanged. The actual violence of warfare, the immediate tactical problem of killing enemies before they kill you, this transcends ideology and philosophy. In these moments, you're simply a weapon operating at maximum efficiency, and the rightness or wrongness of the Imperium becomes irrelevant compared to the immediate need to survive. But you notice things that trouble you even amid the fighting. The casual waste of human life in the Imperial Guard regiments supporting the Astartes. The way officers order impossible charges with religious zeal rather than tactical sense. The commissars who execute retreating soldiers not for cowardice but for abandoning faith in the Emperor's protection. The entire structure seems designed to spend human lives with theological justification, turning military necessity into religious sacrifice. During a brief lull in the fighting, as both sides regroup for another push, the young sergeant collapses near your position. His armor is scored by Xenos weapons, one pauldron hanging loose where a bioweapon melted through ceramite. He's exhausted but alive, breathing hard through his helmet's respirator. "Ancient One," he manages between breaths. "Your firepower saved my squad. Without your support, we would have been overwhelmed." "You fought well," you reply, the mechanical praise feeling inadequate but sincere. "Your tactical discipline was excellent. You will make a fine officer if you survive this campaign." He laughs weakly. "If the Emperor wills it, I will serve. If he calls me to his side, I go gladly. Either way, I am content." The fatalism in his words strikes you like a physical blow. He genuinely believes that his survival or death is determined by divine will, rather than skill, tactics, and random chance. The comfort this provides him is obvious, but so is the damage it does to rational, tactical thinking. If you believe a god decides outcomes, why bother with careful planning or proper precautions? Your survival depends on your choices, you tell him, unable to let the superstition pass unchallenged. On your skill and caution. The Emperor is not directing individual fates from terror. You live or die based on what you do, not what he wills. The sergeant is silent for a long moment, processing words that probably sound heretical to his indoctrinated ears. Finally, he speaks quietly, voice pitched for your senses only. "My father told me something strange," he says. He served in this chapter for 3 centuries before falling in battle. Before he died, he said the oldest among us, the Dreadnoughts interred during the Crusade, sometimes speak of the Emperor differently, as if they knew him as something other than a god. I never understood what he meant until now. You recognize the danger in this moment. This young warrior is questioning the fundamental tenets of his faith based on your words. That questioning could spread, could cause him spiritual agony, could even mark him as heretical if reported to the wrong authorities. What you believe is your own matter, you say carefully. I cannot tell you what to think. I can only share what I remember, and what I remember does not align with current imperial doctrine. Whether that makes me right or simply confused by age is not for me to determine. But you knew him, the sergeant presses. You stood in his presence. If anyone would know his nature, it would be those who actually met the man. Man, not God. The distinction is subtle but significant. I knew a being of immense power who rejected divinity, you say finally, who explicitly commanded that he not be worshipped, who built an empire on principles directly opposed to religious faith. What the Imperium has made him into contradicts everything he told us he was. That is all I know with certainty. The sergeant nods slowly, absorbing this information. Thank you, Ancient One, for your honesty, if nothing else. The Tyrannid attack resumes before either of you can continue the conversation. The sergeant returns to his squad, fighting with the same courage and skill as before. But you wonder if you've planted seeds of doubt that will eventually destroy him, or if the truth is worth the potential cost to his faith. The battle concludes with Imperial victory, though the cost is staggering. Thousands of Imperial guardsmen dead, dozens of Astartes fallen, entire tank companies reduced to smoking wreckage. The Tyrannid splinter fleet is driven off, their bioships retreating into the void to seek easier prey. By any strategic measure, this counts as success. But standing amid the carnage, surrounded by bodies both human and Xenos, you struggle to see victory. You see only waste, resources expended, lives ended, suffering endured, all in service of an Imperium that has betrayed every ideal it was founded upon. The chaplains move through the battlefield offering prayers for the fallen, promising that their souls now serve the Emperor directly in whatever afterlife the Imperial cult believes awaits the faithful. The survivors cluster around these religious figures like moths drawn to flames, desperate for any comfort in the aftermath of horror. You offer no prayers. You simply stand watch over the dead, a silent monument to ideals that died long before these warriors were born. The return to the fortress monastery is somber despite the tactical victory. Too many brothers were lost, too much equipment destroyed. The chapter will need months to rebuild its strength before it can answer another call for aid. This is the reality of modern imperial warfare. Endless attrition with no prospect of decisive victory, just the grinding hope that losses can be replaced quickly enough to prevent collapse. They return you to the awakening chamber, the tech marines already discussing putting you back into stasis. Your wisdom has been utilized, your firepower expended, and now they want to preserve you for whatever next crisis might require your presence. You should feel relief. The prospect of sleep, of unconsciousness free from the burden of memory and knowledge, should be welcome. But instead, you feel something like dread at the thought of returning to the darkness. Because you know that when you wake again, whether in decades or centuries, the Imperium will be even, further degraded, more knowledge will be lost, more superstition will take root, more of the original vision will be forgotten. Each awakening will reveal new depths of betrayal, new ways in which humanity has failed itself. Brother Tech Marine, you say, as they prepare your systems for stasis. A question, if I may. Of course, Ancient One. How may I serve? If you discovered that everything you believed was based on lies, would you want to know? Or would you prefer the comfort of ignorance? The Tech Marine is silent, clearly troubled by the question. Finally he speaks, choosing words carefully. I would want to know the truth, Ancient One, even if that truth brought pain, even if it challenged everything I thought I understood. Because faith built on lies is no faith at all, only delusion. Even if knowing the truth changed nothing, you press. Even if you remained powerless to fix what was broken. Yes, he says firmly, because bearing witness matters, because memory matters, because someone needs to know what was lost, even if that knowledge serves no practical purpose. It's the best answer you could have hoped for, though it provides little comfort. The tech marine is young enough that the idealism in his words might survive contact with reality. Or perhaps it will be crushed by the weight of institutional inertia, by the impossibility of reforming a civilization that has calcified around its own corruption. Then remember this conversation, you tell him. Remember that at least one ancient questioned the path the Imperium has taken. And if you ever have the power to change things, to reclaim even a fragment of what was lost, remember that someone believed it mattered. I will, Ancient One, he promises, though you suspect he doesn't fully understand what you're asking him to remember. Your words will be recorded in my private logs. Should circumstances ever permit, I will share them with those who might act upon your wisdom. It's something, a tiny spark of possible resistance preserved against the darkness. Almost certainly futile, but perhaps better than nothing. The stasis protocols engage, and you feel your consciousness beginning to dim. The last thing you're aware of is the tech marine reciting prayers over your sarcophagus, asking the machine god to preserve your sacred form during sleep. Even this small act of preservation is wrapped in religious language that would have been meaningless during the Great Crusade. But you cannot protest. Your voice is already fading, systems shutting down one by one as the sleep takes hold. Your last conscious thought is a question with no answer. How many more times will you wake to witness the slow death of everything you once believed in? So ends another awakening for the Ancient One. Another brief interval of consciousness in a half-life that spans millennia. The fortress monastery settles back into its routines, the brothers returning to training and prayer, the war continuing on, distant worlds. In the sealed archives, records of this awakening will be stored alongside centuries of similar accounts. Future historians, if they exist, might study them and puzzle over the ancients' strange questions and unsettling observations. Or perhaps the records will simply gather dust, one more piece of irrelevant history in an Imperium too busy surviving to examine its own contradictions. What matters in the end is that memory persists. Locked in metal shells and preserved through technological miracles, a handful of warriors carry knowledge of what the Imperium was meant to be. They are living links to a dead age, witnesses to failure, monuments to betrayed ideals. They cannot change what has been done. They cannot restore what was lost. They can only remember, and in remembering, perhaps preserve some fragment of truth against the lies that have become official doctrine. It is cold comfort. It is inadequate reparation for the death of the Emperor's dream. But it is all they have, these ancients from a better time, these ghosts in machines who remember when the Imperium believed in something more than survival. So they wake and serve and sleep again. And each time they return to consciousness, they measure the distance between memory and reality, between vision and failure, between what was promised and what remains. And that distance grows ever wider as the Imperium sinks deeper into the superstitious nightmare it has become. If you've found this exploration of a pre-heresy dreadnought's perspective meaningful, I'd appreciate your support for the channel. Please hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into Warhammer 40K lore, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you want to ask a warrior who knew the Emperor personally? What questions would you have for someone who remembers when the Imperium believed in reason rather than faith? The tragedy of these ancients, waking to witness the complete betrayal of everything they fought for, represents one of the most profound horrors in the 40K setting. They are not simply warriors out of time, but idealists forced to watch their ideals die slowly across 10,000 years. They carry the memory of what could have been, what should have been, if only the Great Crusade had succeeded in its true purpose. In a galaxy that worships the Emperor as a god, they alone remember when he insisted he was simply a man. In an Imperium drowning in superstition, they alone remember when reason was meant to guide humanity forward. In a civilization that has abandoned every principle it was founded upon, they alone preserve the memory of those original principles. That knowledge doesn't change anything. It doesn't make the Imperium better or restore what was lost. But perhaps, in some small way, it matters that someone remembers, that some witness remains to the promises that were broken and the dreams that died. Even if that witness is mechanical, even if that memory brings only grief, even if nothing can ever be reclaimed, perhaps it matters that someone knows. Perhaps that's enough. Or perhaps it's just another comfortable lie we tell ourselves to make the tragedy bearable. Welcome to Warhammer 40,000, where even memory is a burden and truth offers no comfort. Thank you for watching. The Emperor protects, or at least, he used to insist he was trying to.